Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description. The Boy with Hacky by Donald Grimm. What if Luffy discovered his hacky at a young age, like when Shanks was around? Watch as a stronger, smarter Luffy emerges to take the Grand Line by storm with the power of the King's disposition. I don't own anything, adios.
Nami was about to pull out a map and give a lecture, but Liam intervened. Allow me, Nami. I did grow up here, if you remember. Nami acquiesced, her eyes darting around the ship as if expecting monsters to appear out of nowhere. If so, it's because she was. Liam cleared his throat. Some of you would completely miss a lecture, so I'll resort to some pretty pictures. So saying, he flung his arms wide and yelled, "Con transform." With that, he exploded into a fine mist, composed of the glowing blue-white substance the crew recognized as ectoplasm. While everyone dealt with a mild panic attack, the mist reformed into a giant, animated map of the Grand Line and the two comm belts. Liam's voice boomed out towards them from some disembodied source. "Comm belt for morons, class is in session. We need to keep this quick, so pay attention. There's a reason why people can't just sail into the Grand Line. That reason is the comm belt, a stretch of ocean on both sides of the Grand Line. On the map, a caravel much like the Going Merry cheerily sailed into a green stretch of ocean labeled comm belt, where it slowed to a halt. In the comm belt, there are no winds and no ocean currents. It exists in a constant state of still, calm, water. Tiny stick figures on the ship poked the sail and rudder, but the ship refused to move. Luffy and Usopp were paying apt attention, while Zoro and Jin watched impassively and Sanji hovered protectively near Nami and APIs, starting to get a bad feeling. In case you're wondering why people don't just row through, here's why. With a simple finality, a giant fish head popped out of the water, swallowing the ship whole before diving once more. There was pure silence on the Going Merry. As you can see, the comm belt is also the breeding ground of the largest sea kings in the world. This class is now dismissed. Rowing for your life like a bat out of hell 101 feet begins in 5 minutes. With that cheerful statement, Liam reformed himself, where he found himself staring into the flabbergasted eyes of the crew and a little girl. Did I stutter? Run, people, run for your mother lives. The crew burst into action, but it was already too late. The sea shook as the entire surface seemed to explode. There was a dizzying moment of motion upward, and then the Straw Hats found themselves panicking. Why? Because they were currently on the nose of a creature, oddly colored like a cow, which had a pupil larger than the Going Merry. They were also surrounded by countless sea creatures on a similar scale. Jin slowly turned to face Liam, who seemed resigned to the situation. "You grew up here?" "Yup. No wonder you're insane. Why thank you." Zoro, always the most serious in any situation, hissed instructions at everyone. "Listen, just stay still. They'll go down eventually. Then we row until our arms fall off." A decent plan, but one that will never be realized. "They're so huge, we're dead." Usopp simply couldn't restrain himself. With a ruthlessness only a woman can possess, Nami shaped her hacky into a solid block of force which she aimed with exact precision to the effect of making Usopp sing soprano. It was rather counterproductive, but their cover had already been blown, and it made her feel better. The beast tilted its head to the side, sending the unanchored APIs flying into the open air. She screamed at the top of her lungs, as a frog from below launched itself from below to catch the tiny treat. The crew watched in horror, except for Luffy. The captain had found himself moving even before APIs had left the deck. He couldn't really put it into words, but it was as if the scene had flashed through his mind before it had happened. Guess Nami isn't the only one who can do this. Luffy swung his arm up, taking APIs out of the frog's reach, ignoring her startled cry of, his arm stretched. What he did pay attention to was the girl yelling at him, "Luffy, swing me at the thing's nose." Complying, the captain swung the little girl at the nostril of the Going Merry's newest dry dock. "What are you doing with that girl?" Sanji yelled, his chivalry carrying over to even this young bud of the fairer sex. Luffy intelligently replied, "No idea." The girl's diabolical plan became evident, however, when she swung out of the nostril and began reeling in towards the ship with possibly the world's largest nose hair clutched in her arms. The crew barely had time to marvel at the suicidal gall of the grinning girl before their world shook with the tremors of a massive sneeze that slowly built until it exploded out from the beast below them, sending them flying through the air. "We're flying," was the universal cry of the crew, most with horror, one with glee, and one with blasé interest. The Going Merry hop-scotched through the water quite haphazardly from there until it reached the safe waters of East Blue. The entire population of the ship was in disarray, sans the second newest denizen, who merely glided to a halt before solidifying back on deck. Those devil fruit users, always getting the last laugh, aren't they? In 24 hours, the crew found itself in a very odd position. This position being in the living room of API's home, slowly starving, while simultaneously being bored to death by an old man who apparently had eidetic memory. Earlier that day, the crew had arrived at Gunkan Island, despite a mild panic among the dumber members of the crew due to the morning fog. The Straw Hats found a rather hostile welcoming party, which had been swiftly assuaged by API's good word and the one-track mind Luffy displayed when his first words were a question as to if there was a meat store on the island. When questioned as to why the Marines, who apparently were still snooping around, had detained her in the first place, API's feigned ignorance, even though she had simply said she couldn't say while on the ship. Suspicion grew among the wise portions of the crew. They had been saved, doomed by the arrival of API's grandfather, Bokuden, who invited all of them over for a lunch of buttermint, pork-filled buns, at his house. Joy's body gave some post-mortem twitching when the crew discovered that API's grandfather used a very old method of cooking that took 5 hours. While waiting for their tortuously late meal, the crew made a fresh attempt at questioning API's, which was overheard by Bokuden. The beginning of their condemnation had seemed simple enough. "This island doesn't have much, but we do have our legend," the grandfather said in his wheezy voice. "We were descended from the Lost Island, which sank thousands of years ago." From that point onward, the man had Liam's undivided attention. Lost Island was famous for the Senenryu, the thousand-year dragons, and their Ryukatsu, the dragon bones rumored to grant eternal life. However, both have been lost to legend. Nami mused, "That's interesting, but why would the Marines chase some old story? Is there a clue in the legend or something?" That had been the beginning of the end. The old man had then proceeded to give a complete, highly detailed account of the entire legend and the history of Lost Island. And by highly detailed, I mean he described each monarch's accomplishments, and then his son's achievements, and the marriages of each king's second nephew thrice removed, and any major events in the world at the time, with quotes. API's hung her head about an hour in. Whenever he starts on this, he just won't stop. The crew could only belatedly agree. They all tried to cope under this never-ending assault, but they could only take so much. Sanji smoked cigarettes by the pack, while Zoro simply followed form and took a nap. Jin tried to distract himself by spinning his tonfa, but that distraction was banned when he accidentally pulverized a chair. Nami and Usopp slowly sunk into a stupor, bound by manners to listen, while Luffy merely fell into a coma of hunger. Liam alone appeared unaffected, attentively listening even as the sun began to sink in the sky. API's had snuck out long ago. Luffy, half asleep, wandered off muttering, "FTER 20 minutes. Nami snuck out after him, both to escape and to check up on him. She followed the sound of snoring to the cooking hut, where her blood pressure quadrupled. The Butamen were gone. All gone. The only one left was hanging by Luffy's gaping mouth. "Baka!" she screamed, actually cracking the nearby windows, and sending Luffy flying into a wall. He got up, completely unharmed, chewing the bun that had fallen into his mouth. "This is really good," he noted absently, oblivious to the seething woman right behind him. "Hold, Nami." Liam, as was swiftly becoming habit, appeared right behind the person he was talking to. He instinctively ducked the slap at his head, but Nami had foreseen such, and followed up with a kick to his face. She'd forgotten to imbue the blow, though, so Liam just turned intangible and let it fly through him. "Why are you defending him? He just ate all our dinner." At times like these, the phrase, "hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," just didn't seem to cut it. Luffy was still chewing, completely ignoring Liam as the albino walked up beside him. If you'll note, there's a trail leading away from the hut, as if a small girl had dragged a heavy bag full of food away. But, if you need further proof, observe. Taking a deep breath, Liam blew out a fine mist, shimmering with the iridescent blue sheen of his element. Before Nami's eyes, the mist formed into ghostly characters that moved like shadows around the room. Con Rewind, a rather useful ability that lets me read the spiritual remnants in a certain area, thereby effectively replaying the recent past. Take a good look. Nami watched stunned as a small outline of a girl, undoubtedly API's, loaded all the buns into a bag, tying it closed. The echo of Luffy stumbled in, not able to see API's hiding with a frying pan ready to hit him in the head. It seemed unnecessary, as the ghost Luffy simply fell over forward, apparently asleep. Ghost API's laid a single butamen on Luffy's head, before dragging the bag full of food away, mirroring the trench. Luffy jumped to his feet. "Mystery trail, let's follow it." With that, the captain followed the ghostly echo of API's, Liam and Nami right behind him. Liam explained to Nami, since Luffy wasn't listening, how the rewind stayed in effect as long as he was within 10 feet of an echo. This meant that they could literally walk in API's footsteps until they reached her current location. They kept a steady pace, always keeping within range of the doggedly moving shade. Even a 10-foot gap didn't give them pause. Luffy merely extended into a suspension bridge for Nami to cross as Liam floated over. Within 10 minutes, they found themselves outside a cave on the back of the mountain. As the three Straw Hats entered, they heard API's voice ahead. "Come on, Ryuji." Eat up. Oh, some Marines kidnapped me. I was fine. Some weird pirates saved me. I promise to keep looking, so don't give up, you hear? Whether it be good or evil, subtlety is not in Luffy's vocabulary. Oh, APIs. There you are. Who you talking to? The girl in question came into sight, spreading her arms to try and hide some giant mass right behind her. The shadows hid it, but it was obviously some living creature, if the rumbling of its breathing was an indication. Stay away, she valiantly yelled, but it was no use. Luffy, Nami and Liam all stopped and stared as they got close enough to make out the creature in the dim light. It was a dragon. Like, a real dragon. 2 or 3 times as large as an elephant. A giant, feathered creature with claws and folded wings lay on the floor of the cave, staring at them with dull, melancholy eyes. Its age was obvious by the bald patch on its head and the wrinkles on its face. But that didn't change the fact that it was a freaking dragon. Luffy started fawning over it like a kid with a puppy, despite API's strongest attempts to keep him away. Nami clutched her heart. How is this possible? I thought dragons were just things in stories. Liam made no response, drawing Nami's attention to him. She was shocked by the look on his face. It was like a starving man who was staring at a giant feast through a window. It was such a hungry, intense look of longing, so full of desire and remorse, that it left Nami breathless just by seeing it. The stark lines of Liam's pale face became gaunt and strained, which combined with the shadows of his cowl and the cave to make him seem like some half-revived skeleton. His eyes glowed like torches though, and Nami was reminded of the passion he'd broadcasted when he'd spoke of the lost country. She could relate to that at least, and she relaxed a little when she made the connection. Here was a living, breathing piece of history, right in front of him. She'd probably look the same if she ever found a full map of the Northern Hemisphere. Coming face to face with something that was tantalizingly close to your dream, but just not quite, she could understand the bittersweet joy running through Liam right now. All at once, Luffy ground to a halt, looking intensely at the dragon. He sat down. I see, you want to go home. API's gaped, before cocking her head. Ryuji says it's okay to be friends with you, Luffy. He says you're a good person. But how do you understand him? Nami glanced at Liam, who was slowly regaining his composure. He didn't seem the least bit mystified. Her mind, logical after hours of studying meteorology, saw the link immediately. It must be the devil's fruit. You've eaten one, haven't you, APIs? APIs nodded as she fully explained the tale. She had eaten the Hiso no Mi, which allowed her to hear the whispers in the hearts of animals. She had heard Ryuji's sad voice one day, and followed it to the source. Ryuji was indeed a Senenryu, but he'd grown lost and was unable to find his way home. Losing the ability of flight, he could no longer remember the location of the dragon's nest. A place where he might be able to regain his strength, hidden somewhere on Lost Island, the island that had sunk so long ago. However, Ryuji claimed that the island would rise again, and soon. Unfortunately, he could not remember where. I looked and looked, but I couldn't find any clue in the legend or anywhere, so I asked a passing marine. But that was a mistake. They were looking for the Ryukatsu. I was wearing the claw pendant Ryuji gave me, so I guess they thought I knew where to find them. She clutched Ryuji's claw. Fear and worry etched in every line of her young face for her friend. Luffy was silent as he stood up. He touched Hat and said, "That's what we're going to do. We're going to find Lost Island and make Ryuji get better. And that's that." Nami knew better than to try and talk him out of it, so she just shook her head and wondered how the rest of the crew would take this. Not well was the answer. Gwa? Usopp gaped, his lower jaw level with his knees. Zoro and Sanji stared in shock, choking on their own spit. Nami and Luffy stood by the side waiting, while API's was cheerfully perched on Ryuji's head. Liam seemed to be in a bit of a trance, not moving and taking oddly deep breaths. When the escapees returned to liberate their fellows, they'd found them all asleep while Bokuden somehow managed to continue his history in his sleep. It boggled the mind, really. However, right at that moment, a villager had burst in and alerted them that Marines were in the harbor. Upon hearing this, Jin had immediately made for the door. In his mind, his duty as ship guard superseded discovering API's secret. He'd barely stuck around for Nami to give him a rendezvous point before he took off for the docks to defend the Going Merry. And now here we are. So, as you get closer to the Grand Line, you see things like this, Zoro commented to himself, his eyes never leaving the Senenryu as he maintained a hold on his swords. Sanji made a similar remark on the uniqueness of Ryuji. Is it tame? Usopp stuttered, his mouth still mimicking a boa. Apparently, Ryuji liked Snake, because he promptly licked Usopp from head to tom her perch on the dragon's head. Oh, he's a bit senile. If he thinks you're food then he'll eat you. This was proven accurate, if Usopp's head between Ryuji's jaws was an indication. Avast ye, foul demon. Do you dare presume to think you can contain the mighty Sogeking? So saying, the 180 of Usopp's persona began to knock away at the mouth holding his head with a hammer. Everyone in the immediate vicinity sweat dropped, including Ryuji. Alright, that does it. I can't believe I'm even thinking this. but he needs some therapy with Luffy. Nami shook her head in annoyance, before she, Luffy and APIs laid out the basic plan to the rest of the crew. Unable to combat the evil dominance of the dreaded super cute eyes, the crew acknowledged their newest adventure was upon them. The first order of business was to build a cart to get Ryuji down the mountain. The fact that the possibility of doing that inconspicuously didn't exist didn't seem to faze Nami, as she quickly ordered the men of the crew into acquiring lumber. Within 5 minutes, the small forest around the cave had been punched, kicked, sliced into neat piles of massive logs. As Usopp put the finishing touches on his latest carpentry project, Liam spoke up from where he'd been doing nothing, surprising everyone. Really, unless you paid attention, that guy could walk right past you and you wouldn't notice. I've been gathering information on Lost Island, but we've got a more immediate problem. It would seem that Jin is in need of assistance in securing the ship. I volunteer for the relief force. Nami smiled uneasily. Are you sure, Liam? I mean, you and Jin aren't exactly on the best terms. You sure you should go down there alone? When Liam deadpanned, it was like looking into a death mask. That is exactly the point, Nami-san. By serving as his reinforcement, I will be able to prove my worth to Jin. Also, my powers are best suited to stealth and intimidation. I'd be much better off with distracting the Marines after Jin than defending Ryuji. Adieu. With that, Liam shifted into his ghost form and took the most direct route to the town harbor, i.e. through the cliff face. Barely a second afterwards, a pigeon landed on a nearby branch. Evidently, it carried bad news, for APIs immediately gasped. Oh no, there's a host of Marines climbing up the mountain. They're coming right towards us. Jin clenched his teeth. He understood the idea of quality over quantity, but the Marines never missed an opportunity to abuse both ends of that adage until it wasn't even funny. No matter the size of the force, whenever a pirate crew confronted a Marine host, it seemed as if there were a limitless amount of cannon fodder liberally spread with, barely break a sweat, lackeys with the occasional, okay, keep half an eye on that one, brood. Jin had grown stronger since joining the Straw Hats, even in such a short time. His experience with the bulk of Arlong's crew proved that. However, the Devilman found himself stuck in a moral quandary that made it so he was still under a mild threat. Damn it, if I use hacky I could mow them down, but then they'd all probably be cripples if not worse. Why did I have to grow a conscience, why? Jin was currently fighting his way towards the Going Merry, constantly fighting against the tide of Marines coming off the docked ships. Jin knew that if he didn't kick his ass into gear that some idiot would decide to blow up the ship, to hell with the lethal shrapnel that would mow down their own forces. Just as the highest-ranking officer back on the Marine ship was about to order a fresh wave, he felt a terrible cold in his chest. Looking down, he could only gasp in shock and terror at seeing a human hand sticking out of his chest. He looked over his shoulder, shock already seizing his muscles, only to look into the calm, cold face of death. The lieutenant promptly fainted. Jin finished playing pinball with random Ensign A's kneecaps, and was just about to move on to the next when an echoing voice filed the air. Con, nightmare. With that, Liam's face changed. His hair grew to reach his waist in an instant, which then billowed around his head as if in a hurricane. His eyes turned a pure blood red, his mouth widened and grew full of fangs, and 2 twisting, demonic horns grew out of his head. Howling like a banshee, Liam's feet left the ground as he flew through the Marines, always taking care to come at them head-on. The instant the lockkeepers saw his terrifying visage, they one and all screamed hysterically before collapsing with foam at their mouths. A few men of weaker conditions lost control of their bowels as well before losing consciousness. Within 30 seconds of appearing behind the lieutenant, Liam incapacitated the entire Marine force harassing Jin. Said shipguard leaned one of his tonfa against his shoulder as he emotionlessly studied Liam, whom had solidified on the deck of the Going Merry. I guess I owe you one, Jin said dryly, prodding one of the petrified Marines with his shoe. Liam's lips twitched upward as he clasped his amulet in his hand. No need. All savings of Nakama come free of charge. Now, might I suggest we maneuver this boat to that oddly characteristic cape so that this latest madness can get started? The rest of the Straw Hats found themselves facing a large Marine force, all of them armed with pistols and swords, who had now declared hostile intent. Poor idiots. The Marines, I mean. Really, it was becoming painfully obvious that the Straw Hats were growing too strong for the East Blue to hold. Hell, even Usopp could have taken down all of them, even without Sogeking's interference. The exchange lasted all of 7 seconds. After Luffy blocked all the bullets aimed at Ryuji, each of the males had unleashed one barrage, while Nami calmly supervised and jerked APIs out of the way of any stray bullets. From behind the decimated Marines came one of the most oddly dressed men any of the pirates there had seen, and they confronted the entirety of the buggy crew. The man had lilac-shaded hair which grew up in a gravity-defying nature, somewhat resembling the top of a soft-serve ice cream cone. He wore an immaculate suit with an odd kind of tie clip resembling a feather, and his eyes were covered by wraparound sunglasses approximately the width of Zoro's swords laid flat. While the leader of the Marines gaped in awe, the odd man calmly walked forward. One of the Marines near the back got up and staggered down the slope, and into the man's path. Without so much as looking, the man slashed his fingers in a diagonal motion. The Marine collapsed to his side, his chest cut open. "You're in my way," the man said, whom had a very unpleasant, snooty tone of voice. He came to a halt before addressing the crew. "I am Eric the Whirlwind, a mercenary under the employ of Nelson Royale. I have no interest in you lowly pirates, only with the Ryukatsu behind you. I suggest you surrender. I ate the no mi, and trust me when I say that you don't want to cross me in battle." He continued with some more vainglorious bullshit while the crew discussed him. "Who is he?" Sanji asked listlessly, lighting a cigarette. "He mentioned a no mi," Zoro commented. "Okama?" Luffy asked curiously, cocking his head. "Ah, yes, that would explain his wardrobe," Usopp mentioned offhandedly. While most of his fighting spirit was now part of an alternate persona, that wasn't to say that regular old Usopp couldn't grow a spine. It just happened to be made of cardboard. Until the strange man did something dangerous, he could trick himself into believing he was harmless. "Whatever, just deal with him." "The Going Merry still isn't in position," Nami casually commanded, once again making parts of the crew, i.e. not Luffy, to wonder just who was the captain of the crew. Eric, whom had gotten steadily redder as he was ignored, exploded. "Shut up, I shall simply kill you insolent brats to get the Ryukatsu. Taste the wrath of my Akuma no Mi." Eric shook two fingers in a motion not unlike a R before slicing the air with his manicured claws of fingernails, yelling, "Kama no Sumijikaze." An instant before the attack was unleashed, Luffy became serious. "Everyone, remember why I taught you how to use it? Show him what Akuma no Mi does." The next second, a razor-sharp gust of wind whistled from the arc created by Eric's nails, the mysterious energies of the Akuma no Mi imbuing the wind to give them Maitu-level deadliness, which blew harmlessly past, the energy of the Akuma no Mi negated by the barriers of a different kind of energy that each member of the crew had produced, which had provided enough overlap to shield the aging dragon and small girl with them as well. Eric gaped, shocked speechless at the impotence of his prized ability. Luffy grinned like an idiot, but the edges of not Luffy surfaced, making the grin seem like the single most sadistic, frightening thing the mercenary had ever seen. "That stuff won't work on us. Better luck next time, Okama-man." With that, the entire crew hopped onto the cart with Ryuji, Sanji's legs providing the takeoff. The Going Merry had just reached Usopp's nose. It was easily the most exhilarating 3 minutes of API's life, and she spent half the time screaming her head off. The crew completely blew past Eric, who had recovered enough sense to jump out of the way, before barreling down the mountainside. Any and all obstacles were dealt with by Luffy's fists, with auxiliary cleaning by Zoro and Sanji. Usopp had joined API's in screaming his head off. When the cart flew off the cape, managing to completely trash the mast of the ship that had just managed to catch up with Jin and Liam, it proved once again that Lady Luck seemed determined to give Luffy her babies. Liam cocked his head as he watched his new Nakama and a 1,000-year-old reptilian aviary fly over his head on a wooden crate. "I suppose I should get used to this. Oh well, at least I'll never get bored." Jin gaped. "Holy shit, was that a dragon? Okay, let's try this again. Enjoy." Liam stood still. Before him was a ravenous, unstoppable monster. One that would devour all in its path and wreak untold havoc in order to get what it desired. One false move on his part, and he would find himself lost forever. "Well, Liam?" Nami asked, her smile making a mockery of kindness, as it promised him pain and destruction. "Are you going to tell me what I want to know?" Liam cocked his head in mild puzzlement. "Not too much, of course. Sudden movement might trigger an attack. Is there any particular reason why you're acting like this?" Nami laughed, and the echoes of maniacal villains across the ages resounded in her voice. "Oh, you know, considering that there's no navigational device that can find a sunken island, and our guide is a senile old lizard, I just supposed that our brand new resident medium could point us in the right direction." Nami paused to look around her, ignoring how every other person on the ship scurried out of her line of sight. "But what do you know? It's been an hour, and we're still sailing aimlessly through the ocean, while an entire fleet of Marines are right on our tail." Nami giggled, and it was the single most disturbing thing that Liam had ever heard. "Do you get what I'm trying to say, dear Liam?" Liam sighed. He would never understand women. No man ever had or ever would, not fully. It was one of the fundamental truths of history. "Did it ever occur to you to just ask me?" A hockey-coated dress shoe crashed down with moderate force on Liam's head. "Don't talk with such impudence to Nami-san." Sanji then proceeded to smoke hearts and wiggle for his red-headed Nakama, who was pinching the bridge of her nose in a failing attempt to ward off a headache. The crew had all gathered at the back of the boat after losing sight of the Marines. Most of the time had been spent catching Jin up to date on Ryuji and Lost Island. Zoro was currently napping, while everyone else was watching the ongoing spectacle. Luffy was wondering why he felt a tad odd when Sanji was fawning over Nami. He put it down to a stomachache, while Usopp and APIs watched in mute embarrassment. Liam's head dissolved into ectoplasm, reforming without the bump that Sanji's leg had delivered, acting as if nothing had happened. To answer your question, Nami-san, I have learned of an ancient island, frequented by the Senenryu, which has been hidden by some force, in the general vicinity of Gunkan Island. Whether or not it is Lost Island, however, is up for debate. APIs spoke up. What are you talking about? Of course it's Lost Island. What else could it be? APIs rushed to the deck, looking down at the dozing Ryuji, still on his cart as it was dragged behind the Going Merry. You hear that? Ryuji? We know where Lost Island is. It won't be too long now, okay. The sight of her childlike happiness and enthusiasm softened everyone there, with Luffy grinning like a loon. Nami sighed. Okay. Liam, how do we reach this island? The albino answered without any hesitation or smirking. I need a map of the area around Gunkan Island. Then, I'll need a little space. Both were given within minutes. Liam spread the map across the floor of the deck, before sitting down with crossed legs. He pulled out a crystal pendant from his robes, creating confusion among the crew. Liam? Why are you playing with your fortune-teller toys at a time like this? Usopp froze as Liam turned to face him. Those eyes would definitely take some getting used to. I told you all that I used the soothsayer paraphernalia in order to make some cash when I needed it. I never said that they didn't work. Liam closed his eyes and bowed his head, a crease of concentration forming as he hung the pendant from his hand over the map, giving it plenty of slack. Just as wood rots and fires die down, spirits fade with time. The exact rate depends on the strength of the person's spirit, as well as several other factors such as location and the time of death. After a certain length of time, however, every spirit dissolves into the ether. The only reason I even know about the Void Century is because the kings and rulers of that era were some of the more resilient spirits in history. The pendant had begun to swing, even though Liam was keeping his hand as still as possible. Even when they disappear, though, spirits and ghosts can still influence the world around them. It can be something as simple as a vibe, or as drastic as a chronic weather condition. Their knowledge lingers in much the same way. The crew now had their eyes glued to the spinning pendant, which seemed to be moving completely independently of Liam's hand. Those fortune tellers that aren't complete frauds have some talent in tapping into that knowledge in order to best predict what will come next. With my particular talents, I can access the ether much more than all but the most prodigious seer, even if it must be through tools. The pendant was spiraling now, slowly honing in on a single point on the map. Therefore, I am fairly confident that the island we are looking for will be located. The pendant suddenly fell to touch the map, the sharpened tip actually penetrating the paper and the wood beneath. Here. Nami studied the spot before shouting orders to the crew. Everyone, get to your positions. Our bearing is 12 degrees east by northeast. We're on our way to Lost Island. Wahoo! Came the enthusiastic reply from Luffy, APIs, and Usopp. Jin merely kicked Zoro awake while Sanji practically floated to the tiller in the galley. They were on their way. The way was scary. Currently a third of the crew was catatonic in shock, half was confused yet calm, while the captain himself had a look of childish rapture on his face. They had been making steady progress to the location marked by Liam's scrying, the crew absorbed in relaxed work. Sanji and Zoro had been steadily making their way through the dishes, with Sanji apparently not trusting Zoro to not drop each one without a warning. Usopp and Nami had been fondly watching APIs converse with Ryuji. Jin had been leaning against the deck and keeping an eye on the marines following them at a fair distance, while Luffy just stared at the sea while sitting on his special seat, Liam lying prone on the railing next to him. Then a smudge had appeared right in front of the ship. There was no other way to describe it. Like the curious child he really was, Luffy reached out a foot to touch the odd apparition that had rippled into a perfect reflection of the Going Merry. So that's how it worked. A quasi-substantial spirit-based veil. I'd wondered, Liam had muttered to himself, looking utterly unconcerned with the impossibility staring him in the face. Oi, Nami, isn't this cool? Come look at this. Luffy had turned to face the crow's nest, wanting to share this fun new thing with Nami first, which provided a whole lot of psychological cues to those who paid any attention. I am already looking at it. Nami had stuttered, frozen stiff in disbelief, while Usopp did his best imitation of wax sculpture of a boy who shat himself in fear. Then they had started to move into the reflection. Look, I'm here, now I'm not, here, not, nah, Luffy had said haphazardly, sticking his head in and out of the intangible wall the ship was breaching, until he was swallowed up completely. Liam followed soon after. Nami had time for one scream before she and Usopp vanished. By the time Jin or APIs turned around, or Zoro and Sanji left the kitchen, the entire ship had already entered. I wondered why Nami Swan had screamed. It's just gotten cloudy. Sanji lit a cigarette while Zoro stood next to him in similar, if silent, confusion. While Luffy explained in his childlike way what had happened to the other two members of the monster trio, Nami was attempting to rationalize what had just happened. It must have been a mirage. I've read about them. When warm and cold water meet, the distortion can bend the light into odd images. Close, but no berry, Liam said. Suddenly I tedded down on deck. Usopp and Nami were by now so used to this that they barely twitched. It's actually an example of what I was talking about earlier, about lingering spiritual influence. Whatever society existed on the island were headed towards felt they had to protect something. They continued to do this from the grave with the veil we just passed. As sudden as flipping a switch, rain started falling down in solid sheets. Lightning and thunder began to flash and rumble respectively across the sky. And this hurricane-level thunderstorm, Liam finished, utterly unfazed by the water falling so thick that he just might drown standing upright. The crew exploded into action. Take in the sails. Hard to starboard. Aim for the eye. Nami was in full navigator mode, more in touch with the weather than her own skin at the moment. The males of the crew rushed to follow her orders. Nami gazed into the storm, almost as if staring it down, trying to anticipate its next move. Liam, can you talk the spirits into lightening up? Usopp was all but shouting to make his voice heard over the wind as he tied up the mainsail. Liam, who was doing the same thing at the other, shook his head, still as cool as a cucumber. Even if the storm was still being consciously controlled by ghosts, I am not a Paramecia type. I know a lot of my powers push the line, but my ability is essentially turning myself into a ghost. I just have a whole lot of fringe benefits that most logia types don't have. I can hear ghosts, but they can't hear me. APIs is making a break for Ryuji, by the way. Liam had one of those peculiar voice that can always be clearly heard, even in the middle of a storm. So Usopp, Sanji, Zoro, and Jin knew to turn in worry, annoyance, only to find Luffy already chasing after the overly dedicated girl. It really was a godsend, his sudden grasp of the color of observation. Having not one, but two psychics on a ship that attracted a lot of trouble, sea cannonballs, lightning bolts, foes with paranormal abilities, etc., made life so much easier. There was a good deal of not Luffy present as APIs found herself caught and restrained by rubber arms. After all, the girl was complicating a struggle for survival against the very real threat of the storm. Let me go, Ryuji needs me. The girl was kicking and screaming and generally making a big fuss of herself. It was annoying and disruptive. Feeling a twinge of guilt, Luffy brought up a little less hacky than he had used against Kobe and let it out. APIs stiffened and fainted. Given both the lesser size of the blast and APIs' considerably stronger will, she'd be out for barely an hour. Still, Luffy felt bad that he'd used it. There must be more of his personal shoulder demon in charge than he'd thought. He'd need to work on his barriers again. Maybe at the same time he taught Usopp to make his own. Luffy snapped out of his daydreaming as one of APIs' fears were realized. The ropes holding Ryuji's cart to the boat were coming undone. Reflexively, Luffy grabbed each rope and infused it with hacky, or the color of armament, rather. One of the bad things about rubber. It stretches even when you don't want it to. No matter how hard Luffy tensed his arms, they still stretched as both the immense tide and Ryuji's considerable mass pulled against him. Suddenly Nami was there. Nami, what are you doing? Luffy yelled, much more worried about his lone female nakama being near the edge of the ship during a storm than he would be about any other. Of course, there was also the issue of the crew being left headless in the middle of a storm. Oddly, Luffy felt the second concern wasn't nearly as important as the first. I saw you were in trouble. Liam knows the way to the island and Usopp knows the ship better than I do anyway. Now shut up and keep that grip. Nami didn't pause to see if her captain listened to her, rushing forward to retie the knots. Of course, given that she was wearing high heels, was debatably the weakest member of the crew. Usopp was a real toss-up, and Liam had yet to be tested, and was near the edge of a small ship in a massive storm. Luffy was good and worried. That eventually faded as Luffy watched her make swift, confident work of the knots. He was reminded that she had sailed on her own for almost 10 years before they had first met. As time went by and Nami began double-checking her work, Luffy noted other details. The way her hair fell around her face like a fiery halo. The flash of triumph in her eyes as she saw how firm the knots were holding. The way her clothes clung to her body in the rain. When Nami turned to look at him, he stared right into her eyes. She stared back. The two stood there for a time, not noticing how the rain was letting up. Luffy's eyes had never been so intense, and Nami's eyes in turn were burning with 1,000 different emotions that he couldn't even begin to name. Luffy let go of the ropes just as Nami stepped forward, determination in every line of her face. Luffy wasn't sure what he was about to do, but he found he was strangely eager for it to happen. There was only an inch's difference in their heights, so Nami barely had to tilt her head to give him a solid, lingering peck on the lips. Luffy's eyes widened and his breath flared, filling his nose with the scent of Nami, oranges and old paper. Her lips were soft and warm, and made his insides feel funny. A very good kind of funny. He wanted more. She pulled back, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "We'll talk later." She walked away, leaving behind a bewildered captain, an unconscious girl, and a smirking ghost. The Straw Hats were steadily dragging the recumbent Ryuji up the incredibly steep slope of the island to the building at the top, the natural suspect for a dragon's nest. Liam had disappeared almost as soon as they'd weighed anchor. Usopp was grumbling about how Nami and APIs didn't have to do any work. Sanji told him to shut up and then exclaimed how he would gladly perform this labor of love for Nami. Luffy, oddly silent the entire time, blinked at Sanji without seeming to think about it. The cook shut up, but stared at his captain in confusion. Zoro and Jin just pushed. Nami sighed, trying to ignore the roller coaster her emotions were currently riding. She'd kissed Luffy on a whim, fueled by a long-repressed desire and adrenaline. It wasn't that she regretted the kiss, she didn't, it was most definitely worth it, but she now owed Luffy an explanation, which could only be answered with a confession, and she wasn't sure how to do that. Sanji made it look so easy, but that wasn't the same. She had to say something that let Luffy know what she felt was real, that she meant it wholeheartedly, and that she would really like it if he returned the same. APIs just held her head, complaining about a headache. Eventually, the crew reached the apex of the island, but not before investigating the ruins of a town that seemed to really love Senenryu. The door of the mausoleum-esque building was emblazoned with a geometric rendering of a Senenryu. A small indent was in the seemingly impassable door, shaped exactly like the claw handing around API's neck. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, before walking forward, fully determined to open the door and lead the way to the dragon's nest and Ryuji's salvation. "I wouldn't bother," Liam said, walking out the door and scaring 10 years out of APIs. "There's nothing but a big stairway, leading to a place we will soon be reaching anyway." Jin didn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean?" he asked, the mildest bit of stubborn distrust coloring his tone, as he took a step towards the albino. The earth seemed to vibrate before collapsing beneath their feet. Everyone screamed, falling down, except, of course, for Liam. When the dust of their landing finally dissipated, even Ryuji was awake. The crew one and all glared at Liam, who seemed to mock them with his controlled descent in ectoplasmic form. "Why, didn't you warn us?" Nami was just the teensiest bit unstable at the moment, and her shadow seemed particularly bloodthirsty this time. The capacity of transforming oneself into their own ghost must result in the death of all self-preservation instincts. Liam showed no signs of fear as he answered. "Simple, my dear, miserly Nami. In the time it would have taken to warn you of this chamber's existence and how fragile the mortar was, you would already have fallen. I decided to save my breath and settle for a mildly ominous statement. They are much more fun when you're a spirit." Nami hung her head, reminded herself that she had voted for Liam joining the crew, and turned her attention to her surroundings, her fellow Straw Hats following her example. It was impressive. You could fit a few good-sized buildings into the dome they found themselves in. Apart from some holes due to the recent collapse of the ceiling, the mural that covered the entirety of the domed ceiling was as clear and bright as the day it had first been painted. It was just a load of pretty pictures to APIs and most of the males, but both Liam and Nami could recognize the clear message in the paintings. "So, are we getting Nami's logic or Liam's fact this time? You two should work out turns if this keeps up," Jin said, stretching out his back. It was an honest question. Both were equally reliable. Nami's explaining, Luffy and Sanji said in perfect sync. The two paused before looking at each other. The characteristic easygoingness was absent from Luffy's eye as the two males assessed one another, as two predators meet each other in the wild. Common sense and resignation to inevitability convinced Sanji to back off first, covering both eyes with his hair while lighting a cig. He expertly blew a heart from smoke in Nami's direction, before dispersing it with his hand. Message received. Luffy relaxed his hackles, and turned to face Nami, who for all her skill in reading people seemed unaware of the exchange. Zoro, Jin, and Usopp, however, saw it loud and clear. All three immediately resolved that in the very near future, there would be an official list of rules regarding private time on board the ship. It would most likely be ignored, but it was the principle of the thing. Nami launched into her lecture as easily as breathing. This mural obviously depicts the lost civilization that API's ancestors were a part of. We are there, on the island with the dome on top. She indicated the picture in question, which showed an island with devout people dressed like APIs bowing to passing Senenryu. However, the Senenryu are flying away from here, to that island. Nami shifted her finger to point at an island that looked like a battleship. Liam didn't bother to say, "I told you so," and no one felt the need to mention it. Sogeking made a surprise appearance. "Yash. Now we know our true destination. We must brave that great hill once more to reach the ship, and reach the actual dragon's nest back on Gunkan Island. APIs must have missed someplace when she searched." APIs couldn't handle the thought of being wrong, and ran to Ryuji. "Ryuji, please remember, this place has to be the dragon's nest. Please, look around and tell us." The dragon raised its head, looking at the ceiling with slightly more interest than its usual catatonic state. Its eyes widened, and APIs gasped. She turned to face them, defeat in every line of her face. Ryuji remembered. The dragon's nest really is on Gunkan. I must have missed it. Don't sweat it, API's-chan, Sanji said automatically. It wasn't that big a deal, coming out here. Now we can go back and take a closer look for the dragon's nest. Ryuji will be better in no time, promise. His grin was enough to mollify her. The first roadblock naturally appeared right then and there. My thanks for revealing the location of the island. However, I'll be taking those ryukatsu you have right there. The crew looked up at the hole where they'd fallen through. The blatantly homosexual mercenary was back. Didn't this guy learn anything the last time? Zoro asked, annoyed. The guy's boasting about his wins being comparable to the Maitu had lit a fire under his swordsman's pride. Still, this could be a problem, Usopp muttered, internally weeping tears at his slip in control. He was now officially doomed to have Luffy as a shrink. Poor, unfortunate soul. Those wins of his can hit all of us, and we don't have a lot of room to move. Luffy decided to fix that problem. Screaming like a caveman, shimmering with haki, Luffy charged forward with all his strength to hit the wall. The 10-story, rock-hard, thicker than thick, wall. All hail the wall. Luffy fell down on his ass, clutching his hat, staring with bewilderment at the wall. That was weird. I thought for sure I could break it. Oi, 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 his crew muttered, even the most experienced members short-circuiting at this display of stupidity. Then, the wall right next to where Luffy hid collapsed. Result alright, Luffy proclaimed. A way out, Liam said, his standard serene attitude replaced with shock. We should be used to this by now, we really should, Sanji muttered, sucking his cigarette down to the filter. Usopp and Jin both had identical gaping jaws. The latter was reminded again just who had beaten Don Krieg. The former was again trying and failing to reconcile that monstrous strength with that tiny frame. APIs and Ryuji had both momentarily blanked out. Nami hit a nosebleed. Why, should be obvious. Eric the Whirlwind recovered from his surprise, jumped down and was just about to unleash a wind scythe when he suddenly had to dodge a sword slash. Zoro was facing him, already in full Santoryu form. Everyone, get going. I'll deal with this guy. Snapping back to reality, the crew piled onto Ryuji's cart while Luffy and Sanji worked to propel it towards the new exit. Eric frowned upon seeing his goal begin to disappear. He turned to face his opponent. I don't know what trick you used earlier, but it won't help you now. Kama Kama no Kamaitachi, sickle whirlwind. So saying, Eric slashed his fingers, blasting a sickle of wind towards Zoro. The first mate rolled his eyes before imbuing his katana with haki. Feeling the need to be politically correct, Zoro held his swords in a guard position and growled. Color of armaments. Tate, shield. The blade of air bounced right off of an invisible barrier about an inch in front of Zoro's blades. At Eric's panicked expression, Zoro grinned sadistically. Devil's fruits don't work on straw hats. You're going to die now. Zoro dashed forward, but Eric expertly dodged. If there was one thing a mercenary could do, it was save his own skin. Our fight will continue later, he screamed, before running after the cart. Said cart having cleared the room, to land on a giant root, hundreds of feet off the ground. It's amazing how we always have managed to stay safe, Usopp cried, hanging onto Ryuji for dear life. You call this safe? Nami yelled, crouched down behind Ryuji where the wind wasn't quite as terrifying. The cart eventually made its way back to solid ground, where it began to pick up even more speed. I'm the fastest thing alive right now, Jin screamed hysterically, his feet kept off the ground by sheer velocity. Like APIs, his only tether to the cart was a tight grip on Ryuji's hair. Is that supposed to impress somebody? Sanji asked testily, his iron-strong legs braced against the wind. Liam floated along beside them, managing to look as if he flew at supersonic speeds every day. I feel the need to point out that we're moving so fast that your guardians are unable to keep up, so don't expect any divine intervention of accidents until we slow down. Shut up, every straw hat besides the captain screamed, the force of their collective haki blasting Liam into the far distance, complete with twinkling star. This is fast, Luffy said, grinning like a loon and utterly unaware of any danger. Guys, what about Zoro? That man back there had the devil's fruit, there's no way he can win. APIs yelled. They all said, their previous fears suddenly absent. APIs could only cock her head and sigh, before freaking out again. Luffy, there's a building ahead. Luffy crouched and put a hand on the cart. No problem, majestic comet. In an instant, the entirety of the cart was encased in haki, which grated against the rushing air and gave the actual appearance of a comet's tail behind them. They barreled through the building as if it weren't even there, it collapsed behind them. Behind them, Eric was playing every dirty trick in the book to keep his distance from Zoro. Sneak attacks, slashed tree branches, dust in the eye, you name it. Alas, it couldn't continue. Zoro landed right in front of Eric, who seemed very panicky. A demonic gleam in his eye, Zoro stalked towards his prey. Luffy, there's another ledge ahead, APIs moaned, sounding hopeless. Can't we just charge through like before? The rubber boy asked, honestly confused. We can't. This is the same wall we climbed on the way up. If we go over the edge, there's no way we'll survive. Nami's whole life was flashing before her eyes. She found her biggest regret to be that she had never had that talk with Luffy. She would die unrequited. She hung her head. Can't Liam fly us? Luffy asked, a mild bit of fear now present in his expression. His nakama, one in particular, was in trouble. I could no more make you all ghosts than Smoker could make you guys smoke. My powers apply only to myself. Liam had already caught up with them, unconcerned as always. Just as they reached the edge, one of the front wheels collapsed. The cart took an abrupt 90-degree turn left, only to hit the wall of the zigzag ramp shortly afterwards. Bouncing back, they sped backwards before the process was repeated. In a minute, they had reached the bottom, at a much more reasonable speed. I can't believe we made it, Jin panted, looking like he'd aged 10 years. It wasn't that big a difference from his normal looks honestly. It's not over yet. Liam's tone was perfectly conversational. Before the crew could question him, the cart hit a protruding rock near the shore. The cart stopped, but the Straw Hats held true to inertia, landing in the surf. Luffy hopped off. Well, that was interesting. Everyone, set sail. I can't take this anymore, Nami whined, knee-deep in the waves. Shithead, Sanji growled, his eyes shaded. When Zoro kills him, I'm helping, Usopp gurgled, given that his head was stuck underwater while his feet hung in the air. Zoro knocked aside another desperate slash of cutting wind. This was pathetic. The guy was utterly defenseless without his power. Zoro was just about to cut out the kiddie games and kill the guy when he felt a hand grab his collar. Oh, Zoro, Luffy yelled, his childish yell sounding very ominous. Luffy, I'm beginning to see a pattern here, Zoro muttered, breaking out in a cold sweat. Before Eric could do more than glare incredulously, Zoro was yanked back to the Going Merry via stretched out arm. Once the dust cleared, Luffy looked over his first mate. You okay, Zoro? An invisible force lashed out, launching the unsuspecting Luffy into the kitchen, where a very satisfying crash resounded. I've been waiting to do that since the Baratie, Zoro muttered, getting up and sheathing his katana. The entire crew, even Liam, nodded in complete, emphatic understanding. The Going Merry made its way back to Gunkan Island, the return trip much less traumatizing than the first, with barely a thunderclap from the dark curtain above them. Once they breached the veil, as Liam termed it, scaring the Marines to death in the process, they made swift progress back to API's hometown. The girl was still rather despondent at the thought of having missed the dragon's nest. Nami noticed and decided to cheer her up. Relax, APIs. Liam will take a closer look this time, and he'll find the dragon's nest easy. Ryuji will be better in no time. APIs grinned up at the navigator, sorrow forgotten. Sanji's brow furrowed, his eyes focused on the distance. Nami Swan, I'm not sure it's going to be that simple. Everyone turned to face the sea, and gasped. A truly massive ship, easily 5 times the size of the Going Merry, was in the water ahead. Even as they watched, a countless number of ships appeared from behind the flagship like the opening of a fan. Within moments, the Going Merry was surrounded on all sides. Iron chains the width of a man's arm hung between each ship, capturing the Straw Hat crew in an inescapable net as the flagship hung beyond the edge like a noble regarding a caged slave. That's just not fair, said Jin, the former first mate of a 50-ship fleet. How do they even have that many? Usopp screamed, fully freaking out. This might prove interesting, Liam commented, calmly sipping a steaming cup of tea. Where did you even get that? Sanji muttered, staring incredulously at the magically appearing tea. Liam, if you aren't drinking that to read the leaves at the bottom, I will end you. Are we clear? Nami's expression was a distinct combination horror and fury. As the air, Liam replied. APIs stayed silent, staring with dread at the 8 painted on the mast of the flagship. This is nothing, everybody. Our only goal is getting Ryuji to the nest so he can get better. As long as we do that, we win. Luffy and not Luffy were once more cooperating, transforming the captain into a cold, fearless warrior. APIs gaped, and the rest of the crew grew solemn. What can we even do? We're trapped. APIs stared at the crew, confused as to how they were all so suddenly unafraid. We hop over, kick them off their ships, cut the chains, and go through the break. That's the only way, Usopp said, mouth tight. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Jin. You guys are our best fighters, you go. Not a bad idea, Zoro said, a twinge of anticipation quickening his blood. Nami dashed to the tiller, her sudden energy breaking the still atmosphere. We have to survive first. I'll try to get as close, but you guys have to keep an eye out for cannonballs. They're about to start firing. Right on cue, every ship in the net started firing on the Going Merry. The little ship started demonstrating just why a caravel was considered the most maneuverable ship there was. The Straw Hats seemed to dance through the explosions as shots missed the ship to explode in the water. APIs, it isn't safe. Get below decks, Sanji said, trying to usher the passenger away. The girl broke away. I can't leave Ryuji like this, so saying, she dashed to the back of the boat and hopped nimbly to the makeshift raft, huddling close to Ryuji's head. The crew had no time to get her back, as the fire continued to get more concentrated as they neared the Marines. Luffy! Cannonball! Nami screamed, sensing the presence of the attack. I see it, he shouted back, already in place. Gomu Gomu no Fuzen, rubber balloon. The cannonball impacted the suddenly much rounder Luffy, bouncing right back to where it came from. The display of unnatural abilities seemed to anger the giant ship. Really, 3 main masts was a little much. A siren started to whine as the single biggest cannon anyone had ever seen started to aim at the Going Merry. All the other ships stopped firing as what had to be the biggest overcompensation in the Marines' fleet prepared to blast the Straw Hats to pieces. Nami had come out on deck once the fire stopped. She bent over the railing to yell at her male nakama. Guys, you have to think of a way to stop that. Can I bounce it back? Luffy asked it as a serious question, his face hard. He was staring at the cannon as if daring it to fire. Neither of you have anything to worry about, Liam said, regarding the dregs at the bottom of his teacup with the intensity Nami would regard a 20-carat diamond. Sogeking has it covered. Reap the consequences of your foolishness, ignoble Marines. Face the punishment of daring to face against the holy king of all marksmen, the great Sogeking. With that friendly proclamation, Usopp's Ina of the Going Merry's cannons. The ball flew through the air to land dead center inside the giant cannon. The explosion of smoke let them know that it had hit. Did I do that? Usopp asked, a bit disoriented. It was probably a lucky shot, Zoro said. Yeah, luck, Sanji repeated. It wasn't that big a deal, Jin shrugged. APIs stared in shock at the crew from her perch within Ryuji's wings. How can they act like this is nothing? She asked herself, dumbstruck. Nami took charge of the situation. This is the perfect time for the plan. Go over while they're distracted and do your thing. From there, we can get back to Gunkan and work from there. The redhead turned to face Liam. Any insights we should know about? Liam faced her, his eyes opaque. As opposed to his usual nonchalance, he seemed very agitated. He spoke to her as if he were only half there. Let the villain do as he pleases. The elder shall resolve all. His sacrifice will not be in vain. And the skies shall sing once more. He shook his head and turned his eyes back to the tea leaves. Things will be fine, Nami. Just don't panic, and we'll all walk away smiling. Nami felt a twinge of worry at the albino's odd behavior, but she sighed and decided to just let him be. Luffy was regarding Ryuji, his face unreadable. We'll get you there. Protect APIs, he said finally, before turning to face the ship just to the right of the flagship. He glanced to make sure the boarding party was ready before throwing his arm back. Gomu Gomu no Hashiwatashi, rubber crossing bridge, he said, throwing his arm forward to catch the ship. As Zoro, Sanji, and Jin ran across his arm, he turned to face Ryuji once more. Something was exchanged before Luffy himself flew off towards the ship. At the other end, the heavy hitters were regarding the chains. Solid iron, Zoro assessed, gripping one of his katana. Sure you can cut that? Sanji asked, already knowing the answer. I can cut anything, the swordsman said. Jin whistled, his eyes on the flagship. Damn, how any man could even get that fat is beyond me. He was right. Sitting on a palanquin and glaring with beady eyes was the fattest person on the planet. His cheeks were the size of soccer balls, there was more blubber in his stomach than the average whale's, and his arms and legs looked like they had been stuck onto the massive torso the same way a snowman has twigs stuck in for arms. As if to reassure that the ball of lard was indeed a marine, the seagull of the Marines was tattooed on his belly. All hands kill them, don't let them interfere or I'll have you all exiled. His voice was quite nasal and heavy, and there was obvious spittle flying from his mouth. Immediately, every Marine on the ship the Straw Hats were invading was on deck, swords out. I like taking the right half, Luffy said, clenching his hands into fists. Works for me, Sanji said, bending his knees slightly. What does that leave me, exactly? Jin asked, his tonfa now in his hands. 2 seconds later, the Straw Hat pirates were knocking down the Marines like they were made of paper. Zoro, deciding to challenge himself, got into his stance and focused without drawing on his hacky. A few seconds later, he sliced right through the chain in a single movement. Grinning, he moved on to the other 3. Kill them. Don't let them cut the chains, the fat man screamed. With a cry of, for Commodore Nelson. The Marines on the other boats started to run over the chains to get to the crew and fight. They went down, hard. Gomu Gomu no Pachinko. Luffy screamed, taking his feet off the ground and propelling the hundreds of Marines trapped in the cage of his arms off the ship. Sanji ran right through the Marines, his legs a whirlwind of kicks that knocked every man hit out cold. Jin spun his right tonfa extra hard and threw it at a group of Marines. After going through them like a blunt buzz saw, the thing returned to his hand like a boomerang. God, I love this job, the man yelled, going nuts with his distinctive weapons. In this time Zoro had cut through 2 more of the 4 chains. Just as he was about to reach the last, however, the water around the Going Merry seemed to explode. APIs peeked out from behind Ryuji to find herself face to face with Eric. "Ah, it's the gay guy, the one who ate the Okama fruit," she screamed and pointed. "Not Okama, the mercenary snarled. "And I'll be taking this Senenryu of yours." "Oi, you, leave Ryuji alone. There's no way we'll let you have him," Nami screamed. She'd anticipated the blast and had recovered faster than Usopp, who was right behind her. Liam appeared right next to her, looking, of all things, impatient. Usopp was covertly aiming his slingshot at the man when Liam grabbed his hand. At the marksman's incredulous glance, the albino simply shook his head. Eric saw the whole exchange and seemed to become even more self-confident. "Your companion is wise. That last Kamaitachi missed on purpose. Interfere in any way, and I will shred this ship to pieces." As if you could, Nami thought to herself, keeping silent. Though every cell in her body screamed to blast this creep into the ocean, her rational mind was focused on Liam's mysterious warning from earlier. Swallowing her voice, she forced herself to say put. "What's going on?" Luffy asked, genuine worry coloring his voice. "It would seem that the guy is holding APIs and the ship hostage to get Ryuji," Jin commented, his eyes focused on the ship. Growling, Luffy cocked his fist, which Zoro caught. "Baka, you can't punch him. He'll just destroy the ship and kill everyone." Luffy nodded, before putting his foot on the railing, "So I'll kick it." "Why am I letting this moron have Nami swan again?" Sanji muttered, watching as Zoro slapped Luffy upside the head. "Because if you get in his way you'll wind up in a coma? Or maybe because she's actually attracted to him?" Jin offered, not taking his eyes off the ship he was supposed to guard. Seeing that Eric was now in possession of Ryuji, the fat Commodore spoke up. "Ah, Eric, you've completed your mission, now bring that Senenryu over here." The mercenary looked with disgust at his employer. "No, I think I'll keep it for myself." The man's eyes bulged, and the cliché of a mustache he had went rigid in surprise. "What? But I gave you lots of money to bring me the Ryukatsu." "You did indeed give me a little pocket change. But I was never in this for you. All I needed from you was the Marines Information Network. Now that I have the prize, I'll keep the Ryukatsu for myself. I'll be invincible." Eric grinned quite smugly at that last part. Nelson ground his teeth so hard even Luffy heard it, before flying into a rage proportionate to his size. "All hands fire on the traitor. I don't care about the SENNENRYU anymore. I can still get its RYUUKOTSU even if they're shattered. Fire, fire, fire. Leave Ryuji alone." Luffy screamed as he punched the next two ships in the line into rubble. His Nakama were in turn destroying the cannons of nearby ships. APIs screamed as the explosion started, before turning to face Eric. "Just leave Ryuji alone. He never did anything to you. Leave him be." She flew at the man, kicking and screaming, only to be caught around the neck. "You be silent, little brat, or I'll slice you up," the man growled, before screaming as APIs bit down hard on the hand he'd used to grip her jaw. He threw her violently to the floor of the rowboat he was on, unaware of what it would bring. Liam was leaning hard over the railing, his eyes glued to the distant raft. "Here it come," he whispered in almost worshipful awe, alerting Nami and Usopp to something happening. Eric grumbled about teeth marks, not noticing as he was steadily becoming covered in shadow. He looked up only when the three Marines he'd commandeered screamed and jumped ship. Confused, he turned around, only to have a heart attack. Ryuji was standing up. He looked a lot like some overgrown bird, with the green plumage of his body darkening to purple beneath his wings and CLD his belly. His jaws suddenly looked much more menacing, and he was glaring at Eric with the closest thing to anger that his facial muscles could produce. With a single swipe of his wings, he threw Eric, screaming, into the ocean. Then he threw his head back and roared. It was a terrible sound, an unearthly sound. It echoed and rumbled in unusual ways, sounding like metal being torn to pieces from the bottom of a long, damp pipe, and it was loud. "Make him stop," the Commodore cried, sounding like a small child. "My ears," Usopp yelled, as Nami whimpered next to him. Liam made no such movement, a look of rapture on his face. Ryuji roared out, Luffy said simply, two fingers stuck in his ears. At last the roar ended, and Ryuji ducked his head to regard the awakening APIs. The girl looked up at Ryuji in wonder, before jumping up and hugging his neck. "Ryuji, you're moving again. I'm so happy," she laughed joyously, filling the air with the sound of a child's happiness. She pulled back to look Ryuji in the eye, only to cock her head before her face seemed to explode with glee. "Ryuji, you mean it?" In response, Ryuji began to flap his wings. As he steadily gained altitude, APIs yelling encouragement, he made for a truly amazing sight. "The past is not so dead as we pretend it to be," Liam said, his face almost as happy as API's. Nami made no comment, respecting Liam's joy and letting him have his moment. Usopp just stared in awe. Nelson's oily voice pierced the air. "Fire, fire now. Do not let it escape. What are you waiting for? Fire!" With that, cannonballs began to fly at Ryuji, where more than a few impacted. API's expression transformed to one of horror. Ryuji, fly away, escape. The dragon paid no attention to her, turning to face Nelson's flagship. He began to fly forward, seemingly unaware of the explosions that ravaged his body as he flew. Nelson squealed in terror, before yelling at his own crew to start firing. Before they could manage, a crushing pressure encompassed his ship as Luffy roared in wordless rage. Surprisingly, no one passed out. Luffy wanted to break something. No, he wanted to kill something. He was consumed with rage as he watched helplessly as Ryuji got battered out of the sky. Why couldn't he do anything? Because of the message Ryuji was sending right at him. He never got more than impressions from the dragon, never real words, but they were clear all the same to the boy captain. And the message Ryuji was sending as he made his suicidal path was clear. Keep out. He went surprisingly far, but eventually Ryuji crashed into the water. As Nelson roared in triumph and API's cried in sadness, Luffy launched himself at the dying dragon. He landed right on his broad back, and went straight to the dragon's head to look him in the eye. Luffy didn't bother questioning. He simply stared deep into the eyes of the creature that had seen a millennium come and go. Information seemed to flow telepathically between them. After a minute, Luffy sighed and nodded his head. I understand, Ryuji. I'll tell her what happened. Seeing he was understood, Ryuji raised his head and roared one last time. API's kept crying as Usopp slowly dragged her back onto the ship. She only quieted when Liam tapped her on the forehead. She looked up into that death-pale face, which had a perverse joy in it, given the situation. Just as the girl was about to scream at him for daring to be happy, he silenced her with 3 simple words. What's he saying? The girl paused, before a pensive look filled his face. Return, she said, her voice toneless. Return, my brothers, to the land of death and rebirth. She paused, before her head shot up to the sky. There's no way, she whispered, shocked. Nelson was about to send out ships to collect the Ryukatsu when an odd sound caught his ear. Huh? He said intelligently, before looking up and breaking out into the widest, most hideous smile on the face of the planet. Senenryu. Hundreds of Senenryu were flying in formation right above their heads, almost blocking the sky with their wings. All of them centered around the spot where Ryuji had finally collapsed and started to sink. This is beautiful. All the Ryukatsu I could want, adjust the cannons, shoot them out of the sky. The evil marine commanded, his eyes glazed as he thought of a life of eternal youth. His little fantasy was broken as not Luffy took the stage fully for the first time the Straw Hat crew had ever seen. How dare you treat them like that? They're flesh and blood, not bones for you to harvest. A virtual explosion of power spread out over the ocean, with Straw Hat Luffy at its epicenter. Waves appeared out of nowhere as winds blew and the air seemed to drop 20 degrees. Every living person there, Straw Hat or Marine, was suddenly choking on the feeling of floating weightless in a sea of nothing as some giant, incomprehensible being of limitless power scrutinized them. Luffy was transformed. Every muscle was taut as a bowstring, yet he remained completely still. His face was something death would have nightmares about. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a bottomless rage. There was no mercy or caution or even sanity in those eyes. The world shook under the weight of Luffy's power, and he let it. The Senenryu seemed to freeze in mid-flight, before attacking every ship in Nelson's fleet as if possessed. Men could not even put up a fight as they were bitten in half or thrown into the suddenly tumultuous sea. Luffy himself simply waved a hand as if swatting a fly. The next moment, Nelson's flagship flew apart into a million pieces as if swiped by the fist of God. Nelson Royale, the most selfish man in East Blue, was crushed in an instant beneath the wreckage of his own ship. Luffy didn't stop there. Maintaining just enough command of his destructive half to avoid his nakama, the boy with hacky swept his arm in a line, gesturing at all of Nelson's fleet. Every ship but one collapsed just as violently, the Senenryu flying through the ruins like demented flying monkeys. Zoro, Sanji, and Jin all gaped, frozen with shock and even fear as they watched their captain demolish a fleet in seconds. Nami knelt on the deck of the Going Merry, her arms held protectively around the whimpering APIs. She felt no fear as she stared at the blurred form of the man she loved. Her heart cried with sympathy and worry as she felt Luffy's pain at losing a nakama, however brief their time together, in every act of destruction. Luffy. Only when every man under Nelson Royale's command was claimed by the sea did not Luffy disappear. It was as sudden as flipping a switch, and all the more jarring for it. The ocean calmed, the sun seemed to brighten, and the flock of Senenryu began to fly in a spiral, at a much more sedate pace, around the point where Ryuji was now disappearing into the water. Silent, Luffy reached out both of his arms, one to the lone marine ship, the other to the Going Merry. He waited as his subdued nakama crossed back to their ship before letting himself be pulled over in kind. The deck of the Going Merry was silent as the grave. Luffy couldn't bring himself to face his crewmates. All he could think about was how close they had come to destruction, a destruction by his own hand. He could barely remember what had just happened. There had been rage, and sorrow, and regret, and then the heartless words of Nelson Royale. From there, it was all a blur. Surprisingly, Liam was the first to speak. If you weren't absurdly powerful, Captain, I wouldn't be here in the first place. A king is always a different man at war than at home. What you did, you did. Let's move on. Luffy's words were dead, with a touch of the desperate. How could I possibly look you all in the eye after what I did? I didn't even touch them, and they're gone. All those men, just in the wrong place, working for the wrong man, they're all gone. Tears pooled in Luffy's eyes, hidden by the brim of his hat, but every member of his crew heard them in his voice. Luffy wallowed a few seconds. Lawn enveloped him as warmth, safety, and acceptance washed over him like the tide. It took him a solid minute to realize that Nami was hugging him. The same way I can look at all of you after betraying you for Arlong. The same way Sanji and Usopp left behind all their friends. The same way Zoro can train with that scar on his chest, or Jin can look after the ship. We're Nakama, Luffy. Never forget that. Hidden from the crew, Nami's own tears leaked onto Luffy's vest. Luffy slowly looked up, unconsciously cradling Nami's slender form to his. Zoro looked him straight in the eye before nodding, as Sanji smiled and Usopp gave a shaky thumbs up. Jin chuckled to himself and patted the ship's planks, while Liam wordlessly shrugged and turned to face the sea. Luffy sighed and buried his face in Nami's hair, crying with happiness now as he realized that, for all his power to kill and destroy, he was still accepted by his Nakama. Another person, as always, broke the moment. Who cares? API said, her shoulders slumped and her face hopeless. Blood ran down from her lip as she clenched her teeth in frustrated despair. Ryuji's dead. He never saw the dragon's nest. We all failed. Luffy slowly drew away from Nami, who seemed to let him go reluctantly. The Straw Hat Captain walked to API's, before putting his hand on her shoulder. We didn't fail. Ryuji knew what he was doing. He'd already reached the dragon's nest. As he spoke, the sea seemed to shake once more. This time, it was for reasons geological rather than spiritual. The water changed color from blue to green as land that had lain hidden for 1,000 years beneath the sea rushed up to meet the sunlight. Within a few minutes, Gunkan Island tripled in size as wide field of stone, covered in the growth of the sea and odd stone structures, rose up. The dragon's nest had been found. The Straw Hats belatedly weighed anchor in the small pond they happened to find themselves in, before hopping down to the new land that surrounded them. This is the place the Senenryu come to die, Luffy said, his voice solemn but relaxed. Like the elephant's graveyard, Nami mused. The name, Senenryu, has nothing to do with their lifespans. It's referring to how often they migrate. And these figures, she mused, looking at the distinctly dragon-esque formations around them. These must be the skeletons of the dragons who died. They calcified at the bottom of the ocean. They sure seem to like it here, Sanji remarked, noting how all the Senenryu were preening in the sunlight and eagerly looking around the new area. API's caught sight of something, and ran to it with all the speed she had. She hit water and was forced to stop, where she could do nothing but stare at Ryuji's corpse, floating forlornly in the middle of a pond. Ryuji, wake up. Please, wake up. We're at the dragon's nest. You're supposed to get better. API's got more and more worked up as she spoke, until she was shouting. You told me that when you found the dragon's nest, everything would be alright. But you lied. You lied, you lied, you lied. She hung her head, helpless to stop her tears. Luffy stepped forward. Ryuji didn't lie. He had to get to the dragon's nest. It's not just the place the Senenryu die. A small, cracking sound pierced the air. The crew turned to see one of the odd, oblong stones littering the ground crack open, to reveal a baby Senenryu. It's where they go to be reborn. API's stared in wonder at the baby Senenryu, which had yellow and lavender in its coat rather than dark green and purple. As others of its kind surrounded it, it seemed to squeak something at API's. She closed her eyes, and threw her head back, wailing for the world to hear. It was a release of emotion, but not sadness. The crew let her have her moment, witness to the rebirth of Ryuji. As they walked away, Usopp spoke up. So, all those legends about the Ryukatsu. A dream within a dream, Nami said authoritatively. API's ancestors watched as the bones of the Senenryu immortalized, and spread the tale of how dragons never die, how the elixir of eternity rested in their bones. Time distorted it into the legend of today, Liam added, an oddly satisfied look on his face as he walked through a place of ancient history. Halt! A very familiar voice shouted. The crew swept around to see Eric, glaring at them with hatred. I realize that we've had our differences, but we need not fight. I only ever wanted the Ryukatsu. You can even share in my prize. Nami stepped forward. But all these bones have calcified. If they even had an elixir in the first place, it's long dried away. Ah, but you failed to notice all these living Ryukatsu all around you. Eric swept a hand to regard the whole of the nest. It was clear that he didn't even see the dragon, only the promise of immortality. You, he said, addressing Luffy directly. There is no man that does not fear death. Help me, and you can live forever." "Not interested," Luffy said immediately. Eric stumbled, before yelling in sudden anger. "Liar! For those of us who've eaten the devil's fruits, we already have one foot in the grave. There is no way you aren't afraid to die." "Not interested," Luffy repeated, clenching his fists once more. Zoro shook his head. "This isn't your normal kind of guy. As long as he accomplishes what he set out to do, he'll die with a smile on his face." Eric's face twisted in rage. "Then die, if you're so eager. Kama kama no kamaitachi." In denial at his own powerlessness, the man launched another blade of wind at the crew. Luffy was about to rush forward, when an arm barred his path. The captain turned to regard Liam. In that brief second, Luffy got a good look at Liam's face. For the first time since he'd met him, Liam looked mad. No, he looked furious. "Spirit Cyclone," he yelled, his form shifting into the blue-white quasi-substance of ectoplasm. He started spinning like a top, faster than any human being could naturally move. He carried enough mass to stir the air, and suddenly there was a mighty tornado blocking the wind blade's path. It was dissipated by its stronger cousin, at which point Liam stopped on a penny. The boy glared at Eric, his eyes almost glowing red from within his ghostly face. "You would disregard the past. You would treat the avatars of a lost age as tools for your own gain. You would spit on antiquity, piss on what is sacred, destroy that which is irreplaceable." He flung his arms wide, his amulet winking in the sun with a macabre joy. "You think you scare me?" Eric yelled, quite worked up. He sliced at the air again. This time, Liam let the gift of his crew do the talking for him. The blade vanished as it entered a cloud of hacky. "Feel the weight of ages, and then you will know fear," the boy who was more spirit than flesh whispered. "Allow me to open your eyes. Con no possession." With that cry, Liam flew right at Eric. He went through Eric's body and did not reappear. The man jerked before looking around in confusion. The Straw Hats watched anxiously, wondering what their newest nakama would do next. Eric jumped suddenly, screaming, "What was that?" He did this repeatedly over the next minute, getting steadily more panicked. "Why am I seeing this?" he shouted, gripping his head so hard he drew blood. It was horrifying, in a way. He fell to his knees, screaming, "Stop, stop, stop." He began to shake like he was having a seizure, choking on his own air. He flung himself at the ground and started convulsing. "No more, no more," he pleaded in a very small voice. He turned to face the sun, but didn't seem to see it. He continued to rock around for a few minutes, before he stopped breathing altogether. Only then did Liam reappear, flowing up out of Eric's corpse as if out of water. He solidified, only to sway the moment he touched the ground. Luffy was already there, helping his nakama to stand. Liam gave a breathless thanks as he tried to catch back his breath. Usopp, by far the most affected by the display, slowly walked forward with the rest of the crew. "What did you do?" Liam aimed his breath. "I got inside him. Then I stopped trying to block out the past and let it in. I let myself hear every ghost within a mile of this place, and the whispers in the air, and the memories hidden in the ground. All of it, I let in. And he heard it too." He shivered. "It's not an experience most can survive. I have a lot of practice, but he didn't. He frightened himself to death. I'm not that much better. The past's a heavy burden." Jin sighed, before getting under Liam's other shoulder to help him up. "Welcome to the crew. You're officially as stupid as the rest of us." The crew were sailing away from Gunkan. Their adventure ended and the next one calling. APIs had thanked them for all their hard work and told them how she intended for herself and her children and so on to guard the dragon's nest against men like Nelson Royale. As they left, the crew could have sworn that they heard her screaming at her grandfather that she didn't need another lesson. Luffy was hanging out at the back of the boat, conspicuously not on his special seat. He seemed unaware that the whole of the crew was gravitating towards the front of the boat. He looked up as Nami walked up to him. He nodded at her before looking back out at the sea. Nami leaned against the rail next to him, gathering her courage. "It's later," she said, trying to lighten the mood. Luffy nodded, his face unreadable. Gulping, Nami decided to risk it all. She started speaking before she could chicken out. "I like you, Luffy. More than just as a nakama. I have ever since you risked your life to defend my freedom from Arlong, and maybe even before then. I like the way your eyes light up when you see something you think is cool. I like how dedicated you are to your dream and how much you take care of your treasure. I like you for your loyalty, for your courage. I even like you for your carelessness sometimes." Seeing no response, Nami started to say even more, things she had resolved to never say aloud. "I dream of what it will be like for you to hold me tight and kiss my hair and say how much you care about me. I picture what it'll be like when I bring you back home to Kami Island one day and I introduce you as my boyfriend. Back then, when you went crazy, I didn't even bother being afraid for myself. All I could think about was how much you were hurting, and I wanted to make it go away. I like you for how humble you are, too, for the reasons you keep all that power locked up instead of just throwing it around." Looking down, unable to face him through the embarrassment, she managed 4 more words. "I love you, Luffy." They stayed silent for a full minute. The whole time Nami was beating herself up in her head, calling herself stupid for saying such things. Now their friendship was ruined. Oh god, she'd never be able to face him again. By all that's holy, she'd go into debt just for him to say something. A warm, strong hand gently clasped Nami's chin. Her face was slowly turned up to face Luffy, who was staring right into her eyes. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, wrapping his arms around her so tight that she was almost crushed into his chest. Nami gasped, and his long, stretchy tongue invaded her mouth. She felt like she'd been set on fire as his overwhelming warmth, his strong taste of meat and the firmness of his body flooded her mind. Her hands circled around to clutch at his backside possessively, earning a groan of pleasure and drawing their bodies even tighter. After a solid 10 minutes of heavy making out, Nami drew away, breathless and dizzy. Luffy, in a similar state, drew back his arms to cup Nami's face, making her look right at him, as if she needed any encouragement. Someday, you're going to be Pirate Queen. And I love you too, Nami. Nami's heart soared, and she kissed him again.